there was very little talk between my father and I. For years, very few non-functional words were exchanged between us. It felt almost like a silence clung to, as though the breaking of it carried too much weight. I like to imagine us holding back the words, not jealously, but rather that in the act of withholding, we found ourselves joined in our difference. A reminder that we were not yet ready to speak, and a recognition that we were both waiting for this moment. I often wondered where the silence came from and why we could not find a way to meet there. Because the word has created something, a thought that might not have been the same. Much of what I have to say has to do with inheriting histories, how infrastructures arrive in the present, like the word, landing in the body, in our personal lives, determining the limit conditions for all we can do, think, and to which we inevitably must respond. Significant here is the question of inheriting scattered histories and shattered landscapes. How can the experience of shattering posit a reorientation towards space and time? And what does it mean to mourn the loss of something in the wake of such shattering? When considering histories of arrival, finding a place to begin can be a difficult task. So instead of beginning with the word that founds the individual and splits time, perhaps we should start here with the impossibility of speech, the inability to get the words out, the gap, the void, the cut from which the world unfolds. My father and I did get better at talking as time went on, but it wasn't long before silences returned. In 2020, he was diagnosed with brain cancer affecting his speech, meaning that when he spoke, the words came out jumbled, fragments of sentences, words separated by vast expanses of space and time. It reminded me of my grandmother, for whom time and place seemed to fold and snap towards the end of her life, or indeed my own difficulties in speaking, to hold a single thought without jumping away or losing track. I wondered what connects these forms of shattering, of voice, mind, time and place, scattered speech from scattered people from a shattered land. The question again becomes how to meet in silence. In her text on queer phenomenology, Sarah Ahmed places the starting point for orientation with the here of the body and the where of its dwelling. The possibility for orientation is predicated upon anchoring points, familiar objects that ground us, founding the possibility of speech and narrative as we articulate our position in relation to all things.
Well, I have to say,
when we inhabit places that are not aligned to the contours of our bodies, or when these contours suddenly shift, we can experience a friction, a block, an indication that the ground has been disturbed, which in turn disturbs what gathers on the ground.
Sometimes I experience interruption in my mind, and that's more like a glitch.
When I was a child, we used to visit old castles and gardens that scatter the Irish landscape. These were places for having walks, taking picnics, of magic faraway lands, pointing to other times and other places. Realizing that these places we used to visit are, in fact, remnants of an infrastructure predicated on the destruction of the people to whom you are somehow supposed to be connected, causes the narrative to stutter, throwing into suspense questions of what ties you to the places you inhabit and prompting a reorientation towards time and history where invasive infrastructures can be said to have the effect of shattering, disrupting vital infrastructures for life and the worlds that they support.
I haven't seen them very well since I got back here.
The Great Famine is arguably one of the most significant events in Irish history, arriving in 1845 as a bacteria on trading vessels between Europe and the United States, infecting the potato crop, which was the primary source of food for the Irish poor at the time. While other sources of food were available, they continued to be exported to Britain under armed guard to fuel its ongoing industrial revolution. resulting in the deaths of over 1 million people and prompting an international crisis as a further million fled the country. The famine took place just 5 years after the British, experimenting with fossil fuel, deployed steamboats for the first time in the bombardment of the Palestinian city of Akka. The death and devastation that took place in Akka cleared the way for British imperial interests in the region, while the staggering loss of life in Ireland paved the way for increased profits through the clearing of land and was considered one of the first great experiments in liberal economic policy. With the pounding of the shells, the thud of the body that collapses from starvation, and the churning of the piston, a new rhythm emerged. It's a rhythm that is killed by separating, creating zones of privilege and deprivation held in place through infrastructural relays, ensuring that the notions of civil, uncivil, living, non-living, the structuring binaries of the imperial imagination are constantly maintained. It's a rhythm that clears the way for the individual, the human, the citizen, possessive of its own speaking position and posited on lines of infrastructure, a subjectivity that is predicated on shattering worlds, cutting off other voices, which then appear as fragments, scattered and separated across space and time. When this shattering becomes what is given, the question is, do we bring it back in line, or do we allow it to float for the unknowable length of its duration?
Losing this balance because throughout this period I've been subconsciously stressed, so I've party like crazy.
The shattering of worlds has created for many the lived experience of facing at least two directions, towards a home that is no longer here and a home that has not yet arrived. Not quite one and not yet the other. In the wake of this shattering, the capacity for speech falters as signifiers are perpetually torn from their signifieds. Irish is my native language and a language I do not speak. My grandmother could famously say only one sentence in Irish, which is Cé sin, sé sin Mulligan, or who is that? That is Mulligan. This is a common experience for many in Ireland, given that language was heavily vilified during the colonial period. It represents a part of my identity, a world that I cannot access, scattered between two names, Onunulain is Anam Dum, In Nolan is my name. The words appear as flashes caught in the throat, their meanings and connections scattered like unsignifiable wounds in the landscape of memory. To accept this inheritance can be, for some, to accept the conditions of one's own disappearance. Every refusal, however, implies a twist away from one line and effacing something else. There needs to be a countermeasure. Around the oak of power, the ivy of song had lovingly twined itself, and when the former was violently torn from the land, the latter was flung upon the world to float like a weed upon every wind. This is a quote from Edward Hayes's book, The Ballads of Ireland, published in 1855, responding to the image of Ireland as a place without culture or history. And yet, as he says, where the colonialists had paintings, cathedrals, palaces, symphonies, the Irish had storytelling, poetry, music, and song. The Sean Nós is one of the most old forms of sung poetry in Ireland. Its melismas meandering along the rivers that permeate the island, tracing out histories that emerge from the point where things slip, from the mouth to the river, to the sea, to the desert. A trace of people's departures, arrivals, and resilience in the face of perpetual shattering. Gathering on disturbed ground, the voice that arriving from a place where emotion is imagined as seizing upon you, trembles with the world, guided by a pulse that does not regulate but responds. Seeking a hum of potentiality that emerges from entangled bodies, to move with the Sean Nós, we need to stray to its beat. The only question is, where to begin? I remember sitting on an electricity box one night at the edge of a field, next to the river, near the house, exhausted. My father was ill, and how, as I sat there, I heard something approaching in the darkness, and how something straining my eyes to see. Listening to the steps, I saw a deer walking along the path. I remember I let out a shout at it and it took off away into the night, into the direction of the Intel factory where we used to go as teenagers, next to the canal where the famine migrants used to walk, where we used to walk with our dog Colleen, and where we used to watch the frogs spawn every summer in a natural spring. A site of healing some colonial dude tried to turn into a Roman bath in the 1800s, where my father brought water every day for the frogs when the spring dried up, like the waterfall where the salmon used to swim and where the houses used to be before they built the electricity lamp, or where Paddy Burke, the old man up the road, who told us as children all about the butterflies and how we shouldn't cut down the nettles because that's where they laid their eggs, or the trees behind my grandmother's house, which were cut down to give my neighbours sunlight, or how my grandmother used to tell me stories about the ghosts that lived in the house and how people in my family were visited in their dreams by relatives who had passed away, warning them of illness or death, or about the crisis apparitions described by Irish people who had emigrated during and after the famine, visited by images of deceased family members, and how, during the recession, a former dock worker called Tony and I would spend hours chatting at the bins behind the charity shop where we used to work on the government unemployment scheme, and talk about the connection between improvisational music and betting on horses. Gathered here between the fragments of shattered worlds, uncovering a shattering of tones and voices that overpopulate the measure, shimmering, oscillating, ornamenting and traversing the individual speaking position, a surplus of potentiality bubbling in the weight, at once relational and antagonistic, a resonance with which to create a propositional space on the negativity of what currently exists that somehow always seems to be leading you home. Sorry about that. I wasn't sure if it was a good time to call. Betsy did mention that you were able to do it, and that's good. What was it? They've been keeping me up to date as much as they can in any way. But anyway, it was good to hear your voice and that you're keeping busy, practicing words and so on. I'll give you a try later and see if that works. And in the meantime, take it easy, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye-bye. Between the scattered fragments of shattered worlds, there exists a latent potentiality, and yet, as the world continues to be shattered, the question of how we orient ourselves to loss will become increasingly important. The voice recording you just heard was the last one that I sent to my father, dated April 5th, 2021. He passed away in July of that year, meaning that while I was finishing my thesis and writing this text 3 years ago, I was sitting with him as his words became tangled, helping to create assemblages from leftover protein bottles. I remember hearing how he wanted to be an artist as a child, and I had always intended to do a project with him about these funny little things that he was always making. What is happening here is perhaps a step in that direction. For the last year of his life, my father worked in the garden in front of the house. When he was no longer able, I put on his work clothes and took over. I remember looking down, seeing his shoes, his torn work shorts, his body warmer from Lidl, and thinking, is this what he saw every day? If separations start where I end and you begin, then the biggest transgression of all is to cross that threshold. Intimacy in this sense is a threat to a system predicated on the violence of separation. Two scattered points held separate, crossing the foundational boundary that separates me from you. When he passed away, people said the garden was a fitting memorial, but I completely disagree. For him, it was not something that would ever complete. Looking back, I view the practices that he developed in the garden, as well as the assemblages he made throughout his life, as a series of twists that blurred the lines he followed, a refusal to accept that things could be limited by the words that defined them. Honestly, people thought he was weird, and he was. The word weird has its roots in the word fata, meaning fate, as a folding of effects through time. However, fata can also refer to fairy or to speak, suggesting a certain power in the utterance to create ripples that affect changes in the past and reorient the present. When infrastructure kills, it kills again, and when we mourn again. But in mourning, I suggest we do not lament its passing, its slipping into a history that is foreclosed. Instead, I suggest that we find ourselves bound in our differential experience of a loss that connects other losses across space and time, held mutually in a suspense that is generative of other forms of speech, creating ripples, forming potentialities that twist and diverge, leading not somewhere new, but indeed remembering that other ways of being in the world were and are parsable. I believe my father found a way to create ripples in the garden, navigating inherited and emotional wounds that scattered his life. For him, it was a ritual, a practice of intimacy, through which he emerged irrevocably, however slightly, changed. When read as a series of utterances scattered across time, the garden becomes an incantation, a song that oscillates from turning to becoming a lament for shattered worlds. Is it Leylandia?
Leylandi.
Leylandia.
Leylandia.
Okay, so Leylandia.
Leylandi. We're normally called Leylandi.
Cook use for growing stuff.
Oh yeah, a guy suggested I put fruit trees here.
It's not a bad idea.
Apples, pears. Yeah.
This comes from somebody's garden.
Yeah. Someone threw that out.
Okay.
I just stuck it in there just as a feature.
Stones?
Oh, they come out of the ground.
Oh, okay.
That's mint. You put your hand on it.
Oh, really? This?
Yeah.
Oh.
Is it mint or no? Here it is. It's oregano.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. Whoa.
There's mint. Oh no,
That's rosemary.
That's rosemary.
Have you got thyme?
Huh?
Thyme. No, the plant.
What was for? Time. I don't think so.
Is this a dolmen sculpture you have over here?
Yeah, well, it's anything you like. It's a bad system. That's just a license, you know all of that. Which?
This one.
Oh, no. There again, I found them.
Yeah.
No, I got rid of them.
Okay.
I'll make a footpath out of them.
Okay.
The weight of that now is a hell.
Yeah. I thought you made it a dolmen.
No. I thought that was a dolmen.
Oh, that? Oh, no.
Yeah, no. I was using the black burnt sticks as a kind of an artistic
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, there's cans over there.
Oh, they're there. I found them. They're there since the dawn of time. They're there a long time. I think this is mint.
Looks like mint.
But there's a lot of wildflower seeds in there, as I say. Anything like I see a bit of grass coming up like that, take it up. Try and keep it grass free
So grass is illegal.
in a flower bed.
Okay.
One of the most hated plants in the world is the dandelions. They are beautiful. If you see one now, it's absolutely magnificent. Let that flower up. If I had a flower bed of dandelions, I think it would be magnificent. But you just look at that. I think I'm going to do that one up here. You just look at that. Is that not beautiful? It's magnificent. But it's horrible in grass. But they're absolutely magnificent flowers. Same with the daisy. Look at it. Same with the daisy. It's a beautiful plant, flower. Look at it. If you actually look at it, look at that. How beautiful, isn't it?
That? Oh, I like daisies.
Yeah. That's why I've left them all around the trees. See that bunch there? I didn't take one single daisy out that I could avoid.
What would you call it? I don't know what to call it.
The copse, the gardens, the space, the site, the blog, the mess, the space, the patch, hard.